Hey everybody, Aaron Herman of the Open Scroll here. Today is the 25th day on the Lord's calendar here in the 9th month, and it's also the Shabbat, so Shabbat Shalom. And I'd like to also mention that today is also December 21st, 12/21. And with that, here's Bob Schlenker.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, 12/21, that is a big deal. We've had a lot of 12/21 signs, and it just happens to be a day where we're coming forward with a pretty special presentation. We've been kind of teasing you on introducing John 18, and you can see on screen we've got the interactive page, and if you take a look, you'll notice there's a new arrival. John 17, 1 through 18, verses 1 through 9. Now, you'll notice that not much has changed from our presentation of John 17. We've left that one up, but we've enhanced it a little bit with commentary and some extra highlighting, and the reason for that has to do with the inclusion of the first part of chapter 18. Now, the entire chapter, I've analyzed that. I hope to put the pieces of that up online. I hope to publish that pretty soon. But really, what we found here was so demanding of our full attention that the rest of everything else just kind of went to the side, because what we've got before us, if it is what we think it is, it's huge. So we're going to get into some of the details here, and we're going to talk about what it means. And we just can hardly help but to be so excited about what this is potentially. And you can see there's a lot of lines here. 17 was big all by itself. So I'm just going to collapse that and focus first on chapter 18. So I'm going to zoom so we can get a little better view of what's there. So 17 is the prayer that prepares for it, and 18 is where the arresting party comes. Judas does his betrayal, and then before this section is actually done, the structure shows that this unit is complete. So we've clipped a portion of that, and it'll be included in the next section. And we don't just want to be casual and sloppy with these alignments. We're only interested in how things actually are, not what we think they might be or anything like that. So you'll see we've ended with verse 9, and when you see what happens with verse 10 and so on, it'll make a lot more sense about why we concluded there before he's actually arrested. So you may be familiar with this already, because we've made reference to this section in John 18, because there's a picture of the reset of time there. You'll notice that structurally, there's a pretty obvious matchup, and I'm going to start right here. Then Jesus, in verse 4, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he." Now, if you're just casually reading along, you might think, well, that's kind of weird. Yeah, he says, "I'm he," and then they fall to the ground. Why? Why would they do that? And why, when Jesus said to them, I am he, the second time, why don't they say, excuse me, didn't you just ask us that? What's going on here? Yeah, it arrests our attention. And for many years, Aaron and I have talked about this and looked at this. They're drawing back and falling to the ground and thought, there's something going on here we don't really understand. And then when we caught on to the reset of time, because the Lord revealed it and then began to open up the scriptures, we realized that's what's going on here. And so we didn't have an opportunity to really dig in very deeply on that. We, as you know, got into like over 70 examples of the keystone pattern and the reset of time. And we've seen similar strange constructions that speak to us about the reset of time and the repeating of the Shemitah. And we'll see more going on here than we're going to talk about today, but consider this a good sound introduction. And we certainly expect to be continuing to root out some of what's going on here. But what we've got is very exciting. Now you can see where I'm hovering over in verse 7, it's matched up to 4 line C. And said to them, whom do you seek? So he asked them again, whom do you seek? Next line, verse 5a, they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. 7b, and they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Clearly repeating. 5b, Jesus said to them, I am he. 8a, Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. Okay, those are very obvious. And I could have, as I had at one point, presented this as a little bit of a different structure. But I understand that what we've really got going on is a 5+5 parallelism in these 2 sections that are in blue right now. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, 6a, when Jesus said to them, I am he. And that's really very profound when you consider that, and I'll return to that in a moment. Came forward, they drew back and fell to the ground. So Jesus advances and they fall back. So that's a change in position, which obviously matches up. So how does this match up? And we know that it does because we've analyzed the structure, and it can't be any other way. They do match up. How so? Well, if you reflect on what happened at Mount Horeb, when Moses encountered the burning bush and the Lord spoke to him and commissioned him, Moses was asking about, well, who do I say sent me? You know, in whose authority am I going to go and do this work of setting his people free? And of course, the response was, I am. Tell them, I am has sent you. And so what Jesus is saying here, I am, you have to draw the connection there. And this is a powerful thing. And I've been aware of that aspect for quite a few years. And the things that I'm learning now continue to build on all those things that have been revealed to me in the past. So what we have in these 2 sections is a little bit of separation right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of step through the structure, and then we'll show some of the context of what's happening here, and then I'll relate it to John 17. So here we have 3 lines down here, and what I'm showing by the bars in the second column is that what's written in 18:1 through 8a is repeated in 8b through 9. How so? in reverse order. It's a chiasm. We're going to compare these sections. And in 18:1a, it says, when Jesus had spoken these words, it corresponds to verse 9. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. So we have Jesus speaking words, and then words that he had spoken being fulfilled. And the context here points us directly up to chapter 17. It's encapsulating this, and it will correspond, as I'll show you soon. So it's in a wrapper. It's contained. And in this container, verse 9 says, this was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one. And more insight into the detail of that is found in chapter 17. So in the second section, I'm going to read the single line of 8c first. Let these men go. What men? What's going on? Well, here in 18:1b, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. So it's not just Jesus alone. He's there with people, his disciples. And these are the ones who were given to him, and these are the ones that he wants to let go. So here they go in, and down here in the corresponding section, he wants them to be able to go out. He wants them to leave unmolested. So that's a fairly obvious correspondence. And then in this section, the single line, kind of a summary statement. So if you seek me, well, do they seek him? And that's really what the subject is here in verse 2 through 8a. They are seeking him. So very simply, the chiasm is pretty obvious. Let's take a look in the local context up here, what we've got. We've got 18:1b and c repeating in d and e. How so? In reverse order. We've got a chiasm here. He went out with his disciples, which he and his disciples entered. Not too difficult to see that comparison. Now we're talking about where? Across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden. Again, pretty obvious. So the interest is drawn really to this section here. And we see here that this 2 through 5b is repeated down here. How so? It's a parallelism in the same order. So I talked about the B and B prime on this level. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them, 5c through e. And this is repeated up above. They're like in these two sections, one completes the other. This one is kind of a completion of what's up here in verses 2 and 3. And they all match line by line, ABC, ABC. So here and here and here, there is only the completion on the other side. But here we've got it self-contained in the local context. There's a repetition, and they do match up. ABC, ABC, and it's the same that's going on down here. So we've got these three sections that are similar, and this one's different. Repeated twice, so we've got 3 sets. You could say 2A, B, and C are repeated twice more. And most obviously, 2B matches up with 5D. And when we consider how this matches up, and it's doubled up here, and it's single down here, matching up with these two, there's a couple of things that this peculiar structure does for us. It focuses our attention. We see an anomalous balance. We see this is kind of a parenthetical insertion. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And if we just read and skip that, we see it as a parenthetical insertion because it reads quite nicely. Verse 5, they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Reads just fine. So why is this inserted here? And why is it part of this interesting parallelism structure? This is a weaving together when you have a parallelism structure, very similar to a chiasm, but very explicitly, it's like two threads. If you twist one around the other, you'll see one, then the other, then the first one, and then the second one again as they repeat through. So this is a very interesting scenario that's set forth for us. We've got a plain interpretation on the physical or temporal level. And if that's all we're interested in, I don't really see what the fuss is about. Why make a big deal about it? It happened, fine, there it is. It's just a historical account. Okay, so now we can tell our children stories or do whatever we want with that. But there's more to it. We're not content with the physical temporal level. There's a lot more going on here. And when we're talking about something like the reset of time, it's not like a whole lot of people are privy to this in advance. In fact, it's very privileged information. And so we're dealing with that level. We really want to track with all the esoteric contexts as they're woven together. I'm going to return to this in a little bit, and we're going to get into some of the language construction here. We're going to get technical, but I want to identify how this matches up with chapter 17. And I'm going to have to do some more collapsing to get the parts I want to compare and view. So in 17, verse 1, we read, when Jesus had spoken these words, he, in chapter 18, verse 1, we read, when Jesus had spoken these words, he, those are exact. Why? Well, let's suggest that they compare, that they are companions. And indeed, that's the way it is. And how do we know? Because the trend continues. There's a lot more continuation of one in the other. And structurally, they're a little similar, but somewhat different. The whole of chapter 17 at its biggest level is actually, as we've demonstrated, a chiasm in 6 plus 6. So there are 12 parts, 6 matching to 6. And that's the whole of chapter 17. Now in chapter 18, this section that corresponds to it is a chiasm. This is a 3 plus 3 chiasm. So in the number of units, it's 2 to 1. So how do they compare exactly? Well, we see the first part pretty clearly matching up with the first part down here. And there may be more to it where some of the intervening sections do line up more particularly. But what's of primary interest here is those sections that are at the center of the chiasms, because this is where the focus goes. We've shown that in chapter 17, and we're going to put some focus on that here as well, because this is the same place where the focus goes in chapter 18. Here in chapter 18, I'm going to collapse the first 2 and the last 2. And our focus clearly is here on the central pairing. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the collapsing up here. I'm only going to expand the central bits. So I've collapsed the first 5 and the last 5, right? And we've got, just at this third level, the central pairing. And it's here that we see the correspondence. I'm going to reduce the zoom level so we get everything in view. So what we're comparing now are these central sections. Okay, so what I've done with the highlighting here is made Judas in purple down below, and up here in John 17, these are the 2 lines in the central section where we read about the son of destruction and the evil one. And here we have Judas. Now, we understand very obviously that the son of destruction, from our understanding of John chapter 13, and even from what's right here, that he's got a name. This is Judas. Very clear, explicit reference to the man Judas. And here's the man Judas. But outside the physical temporal level, we've got another identity that we really need to bring into this conversation. And we have this matchup here in verse 15 of chapter 17, a correspondence that's direct with the section up here. And this is the evil one. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. Now, why would they need to be protected from Judas? What's he talking about? Leave them in the world so that they're protected from Judas? Well, you have to realize Judas is a type of someone in the future. The lawless one, the Antichrist beast, the betrayer. And that's a critical role. The betrayal is a critical role at a particular time. Right over here, we're going to be talking about 2 Thessalonians 2, because this is where we talk about it. And this expression, the son of destruction, is the exact same phrase in the Greek. It's the same exact words that are used here in John 17, the son of destruction. And so the evil one, the son of destruction, beyond the temporal, kind of more superficial view of what's going on here, is yet future. And this is what we're being prepared for in this season, and even through this particular study. So we have in chapter 18, Judas appearing 3 times. Up here he's mentioned twice in the central section. Down here he's mentioned 3 times in the central section, including right here, wrapped around and in the midst of this part that has to do with the reset of time. It's modeling the reset of time. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Actually, a fair amount more about that, even in this video. But I want to make the point that what we're drawing on here is many years of preparation. We've used the words magnum opus to describe what we're into here. And there's a reason why, because this is probably pertaining to the culmination of our effort in this season. I want to bring your attention here to 2 Thessalonians 2. If you're not very well familiar with this, and here's the link, the sign for the bride part 1, and especially the sign for the bride part 2 that you'll find linked there. And there's video and MP3 download, so you can consume that any way you like. But if you haven't already made this your own, become very familiar with it, I highly encourage you to, because the things that the Lord began back in like 1991, 1992 are only now really coming full circle and bearing fruit as part of this season of preparation. I'm going to mention here, I had some obstacles. The Lord kept bringing me in his curriculum back to this over and over again. And it became obvious that I couldn't get around it. I had to deal with something. And I told the Lord, I don't know what to do with this. I can't make any sense out of it. I'm stuck. Okay. And I won't be trying to move on again, because I just keep finding myself coming back here over and over again. So I remember shutting the computer down and walking away. It's like, well, after all the extraordinary provision that the Lord had been making, I hit a dead end. I hit the wall and didn't really have any idea what to do with it. And it was maybe a day or so later, and I got a flash of revelation, pure genius. Oh, the Lord's going to help. Yeah, I'm a little thick, but so this was his promise to help. So I immediately went back in, turned on the computer, and prayed, okay, Lord, I'm ready. Show me what I need. And he kind of opened up the toolbox and gave me another tool, and it had to do with understanding about structure. And he showed me the obstacles I'd had were due to the wrong teaching, the false teaching that I had, which was primarily the basic rapture theory, which is part right and part wrong. And so the Lord had to kind of unwind the twisted up doctrine and shine the light so I could see what's really going on. And as part of that, I came to understand primarily that this apostasy didn't have anything to do with the state of the church or any other kind of business. It has to do with the technical arrangement. And when the Lord revealed this to me as a baptism event, it made it very, very plain. That was like the seal on the deal. And so spiritually, when Jesus was baptized, he had the Spirit descend upon him like a dove, right? As he's being baptized in the River Jordan. And so this apostasy has to do with perspective, where you might see what was the source of the Spirit. Came from heaven, where we heard a voice, this is my son whom I love. So the source was the heavens. The heavens opened, and the Spirit basically came out and descended on Yeshua and was associated with him at that point. And so what we recognize here is that, spiritually speaking, the Spirit was with God, and then it was sent, and then it was with Jesus. And so there was a separation that occurred, and this separation was in the spiritual realm. It was not in the physical realm. And it was one with the Father, and then it was one with the Son. And this really joined them together in a way that had not been previously. This was a transitional event. And baptism, we understand, is a revelation event. It's for revealing, as you'll learn in this document we've done about baptism and the meaning of baptism. So there's a lot of background that goes into this, and a lot of people will get lost because they don't have a foundation in these things. But the Lord has kind of sent us ahead with a lot of years of preparation so we could get our minds wrapped around it, get a firm anchoring, and so that many of you could also have enough of an opportunity to get anchored, to get yourselves free from the doctrines of the day and anchored in the truth. So in 3b, it says, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first. And that's literally a standing away from. So it refers to a separation, a standing away from, a change in positioning, standing away from. And if you think about the Holy Spirit, when it was with God, they were standing together. That was their positional relationship. And then when the apostasy, which is not an apostasy as we understand it in the English, it's just the apostasia, the standing away from, when that happens, well, that's the critical thing. That is the critical thing, because then it's going to be anointing the anointed one, the Christ, the Messiah. And that interpretation is what this is about. And you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he will be revealed, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Literally, until he is gone from among. And what's the reference there? It's to the Spirit. And the one, the unity with God, and then the anointing with his Son, the Christ. So if you understand technically that the positioning is important, and that the point of reference has to do with the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Spirit, the identity of the dove, then things will begin to make a lot more sense. And if you understand that pretty clearly, then when you get here into John 18, this will begin to make sense, because what we've got here is an overlay of events. And I've been talking all this time and making reference to some language stuff. And it's at this point I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and we're going to have some conversation about some of the details of the language that are in use here. Aaron, where would you like to start with these expressions?
Well, excuse me, as you were discussing what was going on there in 2 Thessalonians and looking here, the Lord really was highlighting to me the nature of the expression Judas who betrayed him. And you know, in the Greek there for betrayed him is paradidos, which means delivering up or betrayed. And that's a participle, and being used there as an adjectival participle, modifying Judas. So the point of that language there is identifying Judas as the betrayer, as the one who is betraying. And that just struck me as an important point to make there, as connecting to the evil one, son of destruction, making the point there that Judas's identity is the one who is betraying Jesus. And I think that's an important thing to get a hold of. And also important, you know, we were discussing the aspect of this, and by aspect meaning the viewpoint from the author, how the author chose to express the action that's taking place. And the present participle in this instance has what's called an imperfective or continuous aspect, meaning an ongoing. There's no start, no ending. What we see here by the author writing is Judas who is betraying Jesus is, and that betrayal is ongoing, which is going to be important as we continue this on and look at the more esoteric aspects of things. So that's what was kind of standing out to me initially there. So there's that.
So this ongoing act of betrayal is not just strictly limited to the temporal level here. We're talking about a connection, because this is the act of Judas's betraying. This was announced, prophesied about in John 13, at the Last Supper, right? And then he was told, go do what you got to do. And off he went. Satan entered into him, and it was night. And so this betrayal, he was going about his business, gathering up the folks. He had an entourage coming with lanterns and torches and weapons. And then they come to the garden, and then he's betraying them. But I want to point out that yet, what is the need for betrayal when Jesus steps forward and says, who are you looking for? And says, I'm he. And then he does it again. So who's really revealing himself here? And nowhere in this account of John does it say anything about Judas kissing him, because that's not a part of what needs to be presented in this account. If it were, it'd be here. But it's not, because there's another focus, and I believe it has more to do with informing us now about what's going to be happening and after the reset, because that's what this is modeling, after the reset, and it's also modeling the reset. Multiple levels? Well, yes. So if you're counting, I've just mentioned 3. Is that possible? Well, it's a reality. That's how it is, and we'll continue to develop that. But I wanted to make a point here that what's being described here is exactly Judas's betrayal of Jesus. And we know that at the time of when the lawless one is revealed, it's going to be assigned to the bride. And the bride is going to have a unique role, because she alone is going to be able to recognize what's going on. She's going to be in the midst of a heightened season where there's martyrdom, and where the 144,000 sons of Israel are going to be attentive, and they will be kind of held in reserve for that day, and they're going to receive the witness of the bride. And through the revealing of the lawless one, the counterfeit, the imposter, the fraud, they're going to see that the bride is right. The bride is right, and they'll be moved to envy. This is the dynamic of Romans chapter 11. And in being moved to envy, then they're going to receive the witness and see just a little bit to one side, kind of in one perspective, just a little bit to one side of the fraud. There's the genuine right there. And so they will receive the witness of the Messiah. And this important transition involves that recognition as a trigger, and then the bride theft will occur after that, like you see in John chapter 21. But what's very simply needing to be taken away from the connection here is that this event is overlaid with the reset of time. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but let's talk about a little bit more of the language to kind of cement that for us, because the language very specifically, along with the detailed analysis of the structure, supports this. If you just limit it to an understanding of the physical temporal, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There are things that just say there's something else going on here we need to get a hold of. And when we understand this as revelation of the revealing of the lawless one, which we know to be coming in 2015, the next time around, there's that level. But then why is the reset of time being played out for us here? Why is that being modeled, overlaid upon this? Yeah, we'll get into that. Aaron, what other language here is revealing?
Well, what I find interesting as we're looking at this, we've already talked about Judas being identified and related there as the betrayer through that participle. But the main verb in that clause there is standing, is the word standing. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And the present participle is said to be contemporaneous with the main verb in a clause, which is standing. So they're relating the betraying to the standing. And what's interesting about that, you talked about, the standing away from, the apostasia. So the fact that John chose to use betraying and standing in a relationship there to identify Judas and what he was doing and where in this context is rather exciting in terms of how it supports the time reset, the revealing of the lawless one, and all of that. But also worth noting about the word standing there, it's considered, it is a pluperfect indicative active. And what that means, most traditional understanding of the aspect of the pluperfect considered that to be something that happened started in the past and was finished in the past. But Constantine Campbell has a rather untraditional and compelling argument for that, saying that the pluperfect actually has an imperfect aspect, meaning continuous or carrying on, just like the word for betraying. So knowing that their participle matches up to the main verb. So we have betraying, continuous aspect, and standing, continuous aspect. So that kind of carries through time and is applicable to the esoteric layers, the multiple ones that you discussed previously. So I find that the language supporting the structure and the esoteric themes to be rather encouraging and rather exciting.
Yeah, and the technical details matter. If we want to say something and it's not supported, well, we know we're wrong, because when the Lord tells us something, if he's the author, he ought to know, and it will support everything. Everything will flow together in harmony. And nothing needs to be forced. We don't have an interest in fudging things. We just want to see how things are and let the Lord inform us. Aaron?
And I wanted to mention, we talk about aspect. That's considered a subjective choice of the author. That's how they're choosing to present the narrative or the actions or what's taking place. So that means, there is a reason that it was chosen to be presented to us like this. And so I just felt that's an important point to make there. There's a reason it's being presented and being obfuscated in such a way, but also supporting the esoteric thing. So just wanted to make mention of that.
Thank you. So one of the important factors here involves when this is. We know that from many details that this is occurring on the 13th day of the first month. No question about it. So what we have here is something that I talk about in the sign for the bride. And when we look to 2015, we have every reason to expect that this sign for the bride will occur on the 13th day of the first month, and that's an important element. And I've said over and over again how the framework for everything and understanding everything is always time. Understanding about the sequence of events exposes the relationship between the events, which gives it meaning. If you remove the time connection, you have no understanding, no possibility of understanding what things mean. But the Lord is interested in not just sequence, but also very explicitly when things will happen. And he reveals even the very day of things. And certainly the attention we've been giving over many years to the 13th day of the first month is significant. So when you look at this with respect to the reset of time, what does that mean? Well, I've made some notes here I'm going to read through because it will allow me to be very thorough. What could this mean with respect to the reset of time? It's hypothetical or is a working theory until there's more validation, but this suggests that we will come to the brink of the revealing of the lawless one with the attending great deception on the 13th day of the first month. Yeah. But instead of fully manifesting, the event is interrupted. See this single, this double? This is interrupted by the reset of time on the 13th day of the first month. That's what's suggested here. That's the clear implication. You can't really say that they're not related because they're woven together here. And we understand this context. It's the revealing of the lawless one who reveals the identity of Yeshua. That is the point here. Baptism is a revealing. So what we see here is that there's a setback, literally, in time. And we think very likely back to the fall of 2012. The fulfillment of the prophesied baptism revealing will happen in 2015, the appointed calendar year according to the Lord's prophesied schedule as we understand it and according to all the evidence we presented. We've been looking at the Lord's calendar with an awareness that even the reset of time must surely be embedded, concealed and revealed therein, as one of the very significant events on the Lord's calendar. We know when it was not to be because the holy days of the 7th month have passed. When will time be reset? We eagerly look ahead to those holy days that are approaching. And the standout is not Purim, but Passover, Hag HaMatzah, Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Lord did impress upon us that it will be soon, and while we don't have a sense of what the scale of time frame soon might relate to, if it has any meaning at all, we take that as a sooner rather than later in our projections. And you might ask, well, when is Purim? Well, that day that celebrates the book of Esther and the events with Mordecai and Haman. Rabbinical Judaism celebrates that on the 14th day of the Hebrew month they call Adar, which is late winter, early spring. But we look beyond that to Passover. And when does the first month of the next year begin? Good question. We're talking about a calendar that's accounted according to the watching for signs. So until we watch and witness, we can only estimate. At this point, without fussing over the details, let's just say April 2020 is a ballpark estimate. Once the barley and new moon signs have been witnessed and the first month begins, it's an easy count off to the 13th day. If time will be reset then, and the scenario we describe unfolds, we expect to be receiving more validation in advance of it. And you may ask, as we do, isn't that shift a little too late to go back 7 years to 2012? This is over 6 months past Yom Teruah and even Yom Kippur, but we still wonder about the purposes served by having 6-month and 180-degree offsets of the 4 calendar systems in place. For what purpose has this been instituted? And what does it serve to accomplish now in these last days? Is there going to be a shift when time is reset for the sake of some realignment that will resolve some legal issue? This matter of offsets makes me reflect on how the accounting of the beginning of the 7th millennium, as the millennial kingdom is spanning through the point of transition, which was in 1999, with marked events spanning from 1991 through 2019, and even a doubling back through part of it with a repeated Shemitah. If this scenario is correctly inferred, what does this suggest about the near future? Revelation 12:7, likely a war in the heavens mirrored on earth. We'll get into more of that soon, Lord willing. Things are going to get weirder and more violent, with chaos multiplied. This coming spring, a portal through time will open up through which a corrupted stream of history will pour forth, bringing great deception and delusion into the world. And a shadow or echo of that is the Mandela effect. There will be tech and biological factors in portal opening. The exploitation of AI, quantum computing, particle colliders, biotech merging, genetic engineering, the alchemy magic of the sodomite ritual and mass ritual energies, and the engagement and deployment of hive mind, psi-powered, astral projecting, mind-controlled agents exploiting the Great Pyramid-centric planetary and exoplanetary energetic grid. Yep, all that. Our adversary is not stupid. He doesn't have just one plan. The devil has contingency plans. He has several running concurrently, some of which even seem to be at cross purposes. One plan is the Bezos Amazon version of resetting time back to the primordial beginning before day one. Compare The Man in the High Castle, Year Zero, which Philip K. Dick wrote back in 1962. Yet, there is continual movement across several fronts, like preparing for the revealing of the beast and bringing forth his mark. And I would say if time is going to be reset on the coming 13th day of the first month, we await the typical kind of validation with signs and insight into the scriptures opening up. And I have to say, Aaron and I got some emails and we were talking about some possibilities and probabilities before we started recording this session. And I have to say, they look like signs. So if this is indeed another opening up of insight, well, we're at the early stages, but that's where we seem to be. So when we look at John 18, clearly the reset of time is linked to what's going on in 2 Thessalonians 2. Really undeniably, if you're tracking with the esoteric. And what I found involved with this in 2 Thessalonians 2 was that there was a revelation of the time that was pouring forth, because it had everything to do with the 13th day of the first month. Can't separate that out. That's when this was, and this was a type of what's going on there very clearly. There are others as well. One of them does have to do with Purim in the book of Esther, what was going on with Mordecai and Haman's scheme to annihilate the Jews. So there's so many things that are overlapping, corresponding, threads running through many studies that we've done. We're going to be mentioning some more and drawing some more comparisons. We're not going to do that right now, but we wanted to put this out there. We believe the Lord has given us a provision here on 12/21 on the Shabbat to bring this forth. Lord willing, we'll follow this up with lots more. God bless you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.